This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
.06 at WPSL 1590. Talk to the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And I'm wishing everybody a happy Friday and a happy Shabbat coming up. And it is a beautiful day out there. It is an interesting day after everything that we saw in those hearings. That is definitely worth noting.
Yeah, I think last night was a game changer.
You know, I heard you say that as I was driving in, and I wish that's the case. I think that too many people have no idea what it feels like to have been in the position of not only Vice President Pence, but obviously the Secret Service assigned to him, but the Capitol Police and just the folks working, you know, the folks making minimum wage in the building.
Sure.
You know.
And I'll tell you, you know, having been in riot situations, you just don't know where it's coming from next. That's the problem.
It's easy to sit here now and say, my gosh, they were terrified. And of course they were. It was terror. It was domestic terror. And that's the bottom line. And it really doesn't matter if they intended it to be that way or if that's the way it worked out. We have people who train for ultimate danger in the Secret Service. And somebody's delusional if they think they can go to those offices and not be at risk. Yeah, and maybe part of that is Gabby Gifford's, you know, shot in a parking lot.
Sure.
Right, at a Meet Your Congressman event.
At a grocery store.
At a grocery store. She's in the parking lot because it's, well, Tucson most days are pleasant enough to do that. The land of no rain dates. But, you know, she's just out there sitting with people talking, and, you know, an idiot can walk up with a Glock and kill a 9-year-old girl who was taken by her neighbor just so, you know, come see how your country works.
Sure.
You know, come meet somebody who's from the local town and doing things. And, you know, a judge is there, and there were others who were just there to be part of the group in the meeting and talk to people. Try to get, is one of the things that we say is that it's really easy for elected officials to get isolated from the people who elected them and therefore lose the ability to truly represent them. Simply because they're no longer in the place of being with them, and so they can't hear what's going on.
Well, you know, you figure the Secret Service, or at least one would hope, are the best of the best.
One would hope that they, you know.
And just to hear the fear in their voices was really, really chilling.
Yeah. Well, the fact that they are calling family members.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Think about that a minute, right? Because they're telling people, you know, here's the stuff I haven't shown you in the last 20 years, and it's in this drawer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm not getting out of this, so this is what you need.
Yeah, it's... sobering is probably the best word I can use. But I'm not sure that that's going to penetrate to somebody who hasn't experienced existential fear. And I say that because it is really hard. It is really hard to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I'm thinking of an experiment that that Jane Elliott did. Oh, the week she started it, the week that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and she had thought about a discrimination exercise in her Iowa homogenous white Christian community in her classroom, where all the kids basically looked mostly alike, and had, it was a small town that she lived in. She was a third grade teacher, and she was actually working on a unit teaching about American Indians, and she was ironing the pieces that they used for part of that project, because one year they build a teepee and the next year they decorate it.
Oh, wow. And,
So
of course, there's tons of Indian tribes out there, too.
Well, there is everywhere if people would only look and pay attention.
Yes, that's so true.
We truly annihilated amazing numbers of people, but that's another discussion for another day.
And not just the U.S. You
No.
look at what's going on in Canada, too.
Oh, the treatment of indigenous people is beyond horror almost anywhere where Europeans have colonized. And that's the bottom line. We Europeans got this little technological jump and used it to the disadvantage of the planet. But getting back to what Jane Elliott did, she wanted to teach her students about discrimination and what it feels like to be discriminated against. And that's very, very hard, particularly for white males, to understand. Little less hard for women, white women, but it's not hard for people of color. It's not hard for almost any of the minorities. And I say this as somebody who's Jewish and who in fourth grade experienced some terror for the simple reason of being Jewish. Somebody was going to, nice little Christian girl, little blonde named Mary, was going to teach me that Jesus loves me by beating me. Yeah, she didn't get the obvious contradiction in her plan, but that is a not uncommon idea. The only thing I can think of to do is pound you, because clearly you're not buying what I'm selling, so I'm going to pound it into you. That's the 3-year-old's approach to life. But we were in fourth grade. And fortunately, the beating didn't take place thanks to my fourth grade teacher, Mr. Ross, coming around the corner at a very opportune time and seeing what he didn't like the looks of. But in any event, so that was a moment of terror for me. But what Jane Elliott did is she took her class, and this is worth looking at, and you can see the documentaries that were done on it by looking up A Class Divided. That's the name of the documentary. Or you can Google Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, and her experiment with the children will come up. And there's an interesting interview with her a few years ago where she recounts that her husband, when she told her husband that she was going to do this exercise after King was assassinated, that he warned her that she'd lose her job. She didn't. She, in fact, went on to continue to do it as long as she taught in that school. And then she also taught prison officials, and other folks came to recognize the teaching that she did. But what she basically did in her little classroom, she was originally going to run this for 2 weeks, but it got shortened down to 2 days because of the violence that the children exhibited. And what she did is one day she put the blue-eyed children on the top. If you have blue eyes, you're better, you're smarter, you're whatever. And everybody with brown eyes was wearing a collar to show that they had brown eyes. And they couldn't use the playground equipment. They couldn't use the cups. They couldn't use the drinking fountain. They had to use cups and get water in it, so warmer water. And just little things like that.
Wow.
And then the next day, she flipped it so that the brown eyes were on top and the blue eyes were at the bottom. And fights broke out on the playground floor. He called me blue eyes, things that wouldn't normally mean anything. Or he called me brown eyes. I think he called me brown eyes is the one they videoed. And her comment was it took less than 15 minutes for wonderful, cooperative, caring children to become mean, nasty, ugly. 15 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. That is, to me, that's a reality of how thin the veneer is on humanity. We've got to work on this.
Well, you know what got me last night was seeing a little of the video of, like, some of the followers.
Yeah.
Oh, he's telling us to disperse. And they're inside the Capitol at this point. Let's go. And it's like, don't they have a brain?
No.
It's
no.
like,
They
I don't get it.
They don't in that situation. They become a group, and the group takes on an overpowering peer pressure mentality. Some people call it groupthink.
Like a gang thing.
Yeah, it's a gang thing, and many individuals cannot withstand that pressure. There's a wonderful experiment that was actually done on a dock not far from, a little bit south of here, and you can Google that one too. It's group influence, and they've got a group of they set up a set of lines on the pier, and you're participating in some public experiment kind of thing. And 10 of the people in the front of the line are part of the crew running the experiment. And then the real subject is the one at the end of the line. And what they ask everybody in the line is which line does this one poster most look like on this other poster? And all 10 give the wrong answer. And they all line up behind one of the options. And then the person comes up, and the question is, will they challenge the crowd and go with what they know to be true, or will they go with the crowd? And it's interesting to watch people split. Many go with the crowd, knowing the answer they're giving is wrong because of peer pressure.
Wow.
The fear of not wanting to stick out, the fear of not wanting to be ostracized from the group. The need to belong is one of the basic human needs. And if we were, in fact, living in, 5,000 years ago, saber-toothed tigers or whatever, that would be more important, right? Because the tiger is going to pick off the people who straggled behind. In fact, Jewishly, twice in Torah, it says, remember Amalek and blot out the memory of Amalek. What's important about Amalek? Amalek picked off the people at the end, and people think that that's about doing something to Amalek. It's not. That's an instruction for the community. Don't leave scragglers behind you. Don't leave the fringe unprotected by the group. Don't allow there to be scragglers so that nobody has to be afraid of Amalek.
Wow.
Yeah, people misunderstand it. It's not a condemnation of Amalek. Amalek is just a low-life form that just takes advantage of minorities. Gee, I can't imagine. Never mind.
That's in the Talmud.
No, that's in Torah.
Or Torah, I meant,
It's in Jewish and Christian scriptures.
So thousands of years ago.
Yeah, at least 2,000, probably 3.
Wow.
Because this is in the time of Moses, so that would have been the Exodus out of Egypt. We're at least 3 to 3,500 years ago. It's hard to count some of the years, even though some scholars think they absolutely can. I'm one of those who's it's approximate.
Exodus might make a good movie someday.
Cute. That's about a different Exodus.
Oh yeah, that's true. Wow, that's incredible. Yeah.
So anyway, let me flip back a minute and go back to Jane Elliott, though. And the piece on Jane Elliott, they interview her years later, and they actually bring back the students. They do reunions with the students. And they had done a documentary, I think the third year that she ran the experiment. And then they brought those children who are now adults with their own children into a reunion with her, and they reviewed the documentary, and they had stayed as a social connected group. There was a sense of family in that student body because all of them had experienced being the bottom of the discrimination pile, and all of them had experienced being on the top of that. And a notable piece about that, Jane Elliott used a phonics pack that she would work the kids through, and they would make the sounds in the pack. And as soon as they got it right, she'd go to the next one, next one, next one. And when the children were in the upper group, whichever day it was, they did it either in 2 or 3 minutes. And when they were in the low group, it took them 4.5 to 5 minutes to get through the pack. And the piece about that is significant is that they stay at that high level after the experiment. And she actually contacted some researchers at Stanford and asked them to verify if what she thinks is happening is in fact happening. And it is. The students become smarter, better, faster, do better work. And that benefit, I have to believe, carries on not only through third grade, but through the rest of their schooling. The things we experience along the way have profound effects on our skill set if the teachers are mindful of what they're teaching.
I've got a question about third
Sure.
grade. You hear the school districts talk about the third grade stats, stuff like that. What is so special about
Third grade?
that third grade?
Third grade, there's a lot of shifting going on for children. They're shifting from the inability to perceive what others experience to being able to understand the concept of perspective if they're taught it properly. They're going to learn some of it anyway, but that's the beginning of things like empathy, the ability to say, okay, from your side of my camera, you don't see the little red light that tells me I'm broadcasting. Unless you see it reflected in my glasses or something.
No, I get that. Yeah.
Okay, so I know that you see something different from what I see. When you have a very young child, 5, 6, they don't understand that. They do not understand it. It's not that they're being selfish. It's that at that age, the most important thing to them is self-development. And it's surviving. And they have to look at the world. To do the things they have to do at that age, they have to look at the world from their vantage point only. It's later in life, as they start to get through that 3rd, 4th grade, that they start to be able to get perspective. Can a young child learn that earlier? Yes. But only if they're in a secure, attached relationship with their parents and they feel safe enough to start to venture out. There's so much involved in the development of young children. So much of how easy it's going to be for them to become caring, sensitive, empathetic, intelligent people. It's not that they're not smart. It has to do with the ability to move themselves in the world forward. And that's not easy. And we've unfortunately moved into a place where a lot of kids don't get the nurturing that they need when they're young in their families. And we can look at any number of things. My class right now, one of my classes, is spending a lot of time and energy looking at what are the hidden messages inside stories that we've told our children over the millennia. And one of the places to really see that, and Disney has made some tremendous strides, but in the early Disney movies. But even as late as Belle and the Beauty and the Beast, the character of Gaston, I mean, the blonde bimbos adore him. And that's what they are, folks. They're blonde bimbos. the three of them. They look alike, they talk alike, they think alike. There's not a clever thought there at all.
For sure, for sure.
And the finishing project for this class actually is to look at the attitude in America, in American culture, of women. And we see, obviously, it's reflected in current news events, but the illusion that women are treated equal is truly an illusion. There are places where we are, but there are many where we're not. Pay, obviously, is an obvious one. But even in the legislation and the judicial stuff that's going on, that's an inherent bias against women, in my opinion. And so one of the things that my students are asked to do is to look at that gender disparity. And we look at different things. We look at gender marketing. We look at how did things get to be pink and blue? And, why is it that FDR was dressed in a dress until he was at least 3 or 4? It was very common for all babies to be dressed in dresses. The wealthier you are, the more you were in dresses. And they weren't pink or blue, folks. They were mostly white. The thing with FDR is that some of them are extremely ornate because his family was extremely rich. Why were they in skirts, in dresses? Because it's easy to lift up a skirt, change a diaper, and send the kid on. There weren't yet zippers. Technology changes the world. And then there's the discussion
Never thought about that.
Yeah. Most people haven't. It was just the practical thing. And diapers were all cloth, folks. You had to wash them. So you wanted to be able to get to them and pin. And safety pin is an amazing piece of technology.
Yet another invention.
Yet another invention. Those little things that we think nothing of. Windshield wipers, right? Of course, you didn't need windshield wipers until you had a car that could have a windscreen. Horses don't come with those.
Okay, now your class.
Yeah. So my class.
How do the women view stuff versus the guys? Are they the same?
It's interesting. Well, there's a variety of different things going on in the classroom because the classroom is not all. It's barely white male. First of all, most colleges today are 60 to almost 70% female.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big shift in who's going to college. And that has a lot to do with the pay disparity. But that's a bigger discussion and not for a psychology class. But so they're looking at gender and how it feeds in. And here's a piece you might not expect on it. They're to include the experiment, for lack of a better word, with lobotomies between 1949 and 1952 when they were just about banned. They really did happen. The doctor who came up with that ice pick technology actually got a Nobel Prize for destroying the brains of people.
You have got to be kidding.
No, the way that was done was either you drilled a hole in the side of the head or people went through the eye socket on top of the eyeball and squished this cannula, this ice pick kind of device around and tried to destroy some of the communication in the brain. And here's the piece. 75% of those patients were women.
Ugh.
Who were viewed to have behavior problems. And the operation was considered a success if they became docile and able to clean the house. So basically mindless servants to their husbands or other family members. The procedure was actually done on Rosemary Kennedy. And with her in particular, she obviously had no choice on it. Her father took her there and had it done without his wife's knowledge, and she lost in that surgery the ability to talk and walk, and she ended up being sent away to a care facility to be cared for because she was no longer even mobile. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
never heard that Rosemary Kennedy
the
story.
Rosemary Kennedy story is a life filled with the consequences of horrible decisions visited upon a child. And it starts with actually her birth. Her mother was told by the then nurse to cross her legs and not let the baby out until the doctor was available, because the doctor was engaged in something else. And the birth was delayed far too long, which of course robbed the baby of oxygen and caused developmental issues. So she was already challenged by that and was clearly different from her siblings who didn't go through that process. Yeah, it was common in those days, unfortunately. My mother used to tell a story of a relative in our family who was told to delay the birth of a child. And I guess
never heard of that.
Yeah, I guess doctors didn't understand that there isn't much breathing going on, and there's a limited amount of time from the release of the afterbirth, the placenta, to where it's fully functioning, to where you're in the birth canal and born. That has to be a very short time, or the baby can suffer tremendous impairments. Now I say that, and I also was told that in my case, the umbilical cord was actually wrapped around my neck, and had the birth been just a simple natural birth, I would have strangulated in the process, because the cord would have gotten pulled tight by the residual left inside of the umbilical cord. And so the doctor convinced my mother to have a spinal block at the time. She had suffered back pains thereafter, but at least she was able to withstand. He actually held me in the birth canal long enough to unwrap the umbilical cord. So that was a good case of an attentive doctor, and hopefully I'm not too horribly delayed. Anyway, getting back to the discussion, so we've got that issue of the lobotomies. Why was that considered acceptable, and why were 75% of those patients women who had no right to refuse it because their husbands ordered the surgery? Yeah, it's scary. The freedoms available to women were much more limited before 1960, 1970. And those who are honest, who are old enough to remember it, this should bring up some memories of how things were not fair at all.
Well, you know,
then.
even simple things like buying a car or something like that, where you had to get a co-signer.
You had to get a co-signer because women weren't allowed to go into that much debt.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
So you do remember it, yes, because you're double hockey sticks.
Yep, that's it.
And so you've lived through some of that and why there was a need for women's lib. So even though women have had the vote for about 100 years, things were far from equal even with the vote. And, of course, African Americans, blacks, did not get the vote until 1965, folks, including the men. So we do not have a great history when we look at that. So they're asked to look at the gender and see how it plays into those lobotomies, and then today, how it plays into trafficking.
Woo.
And slavery today. Because sex trafficking is a big part of the problems that we're dealing with as a society. And it's
big business.
It's very big business. And here's the real piece. If they do a raid on a brothel, they almost never arrest the pimp. They arrest the women. And they don't arrest the Johns. They don't arrest the clients. And how can it be legal to buy something that it's illegal to sell?
Okay.
It just, and some of the stings have caught judges and elected officials, and they go home. And they may or may not suffer at the polls. They may or may not have any consequences for buying what should be illegal to buy. We need to start arresting the buyers of illegal services.
It's funny, the women's lib stuff that's had just barely scratched the surface when I was in college. And a couple of the nuns that I knew real well, and we used to have lunch all the time in the commissary at Loyola, and they were against it. And I'm sitting there going,
Why?
Wait a minute.
Because
Why?
so here's the why. It challenges their identity and their definition of who and where they are. They had to accept that in order to find peace in their role. It's one of the reasons it's hard to find nuns today, because people don't want that role. But in those days, that was something for somebody to do. If they wanted to, if you were Catholic and you wanted to have a role outside the home, being a nun was actually one of the ways to do that. You know, nuns ran things.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They had power. They had many things that were probably attractive.
Well, I've told you a story about my 8th grade nun who wound up running hospitals.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They became very powerful. And so that was one of the safe ways to do that, because you were under the general supervision of some man, even as powerful as running the hospital. And the man over you probably let you just run it for the most part, because you knew more than he did about the situation. But he was there, quote unquote, right, to exercise a general supervision.
And they always had the bishops.
Exactly.
Above them, too. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a man making sure they're doing it right.
Oh, God.
But the feeling
Okay.
of power is so addictive and so self-satisfying to some of these folks that they overlooked that.
That's interesting.
It's one of the reasons why. So here's a piece about the sex trafficking. And again, there are videos and you can find it. In general, the pimps treat their women as horribly as they treat them. They give them things they never had growing up, such as praise, attention, and even though it's a false, a feeling of being loved. They're not loved. They're a commodity. But there's the pretense of doing that satisfies their needs. And because they've never had the real thing, they can't judge enough to tell that they're being lied to. And it feels so good to be told that you're doing a good job. I'm so proud of you. You're being a wonderful little prostitute. They don't say those words, but I'm so proud of what you're doing. You're helping so much. You mean so much to me. I want the best for you. And they don't have the experience based to know that that's a flat out lie. And so it's the image that women are stolen in parking lots and abducted is not a good image. They're lured because the ones who are in really horrible situations are the most pliable. And they like young ones because they don't know enough yet.
Right.
And the real bottom line is, if there weren't buyers for it, if it was illegal to buy it, there wouldn't be the commodity on the market. It just wouldn't be. It wouldn't be worthwhile. It wouldn't pay. There wouldn't be the billions of dollars. That's a huge industry. And the women who are selling their bodies are not getting the least bit of a fair shake out of it. And the amount of people being trafficked in Port St. Lucie is horrible. Florida is one of the hotbeds of trafficked people, not just for sex, but also for labor. We have a huge trafficking situation. And one of the key things, right, the trafficking involves fraud, coercion, and a third party. So if somebody controls somebody else and they're using fraud, force, and deception to accomplish that, to hold that person prisoner, then that's trafficking. And it might be for labor. It might be to work on a farm. It might be to work in a nail salon. It's a very famous place for it. it's not uncommon to take somebody who's being trafficked and put them somewhere undocumented in another country, not just in America, but throughout the world this is happening, where people are put in positions where they don't really have a good escape. They don't speak the language. They don't have anywhere to run because they've been lured away from their safety net. And there are wedges that the pimps will put in, whether it's for labor, I'm going to use the same word, the handler, the controller, isolates the person so that they shut off everybody else. And, they'll go into the phones and delete messages from family members and friends asking if they're okay, just to show them that that nobody cares about them, that they're the only ones who care about their welfare. And so as bad as it is, as much as they hate it, it's the best environment they can think of. And that's the real prisoner. It's not with chains. It's a soft shackle, but it's real.
I think it's one of the television shows we were watching, whether it's Bull or something like that, where they had a scene outside of a courtroom, and there was this woman who was going to testify, and then this guy had her wallet, this guy had her phone, and she didn't have any communication advice whatsoever. He had it all. And they told him to leave, and that was like a real scene. Yeah.
So that's a case of somebody who's being trafficked or controlled. And, why do we allow any human being to do that over any other human being?
And your students get that?
Oh, yeah. Some of them get it more than others. Some of them, in one of the first classes that I taught at Kaiser, one of the students, she told the story of herself being trafficked when she was younger. And, she escaped it, and her life is more put together. But, she told the story of how she got lured and what she had to do to try to escape.
Boy, that's
and successfully did it, actually.
That is mortifying. Wow.
And, she was lured from this part of Florida down into the Keys to isolate her. And,
Well, that's isolation down there.
Well, it is if your friends and family are all up here and they don't know where you are. And you don't have any good way to get away. Then, and you've got to, where are you going to go? This one video that we watched yesterday, which is a woman telling her story of when she was being trafficked, and she said, as bad as it was, she had a roof over her head, she had food in her belly, she had clothes to wear, and where was she going to go if she ran away from that? Who was going to help? She didn't have any skills to earn her own money. Where was she going to sleep, etc.? And so with that, I have a call from Curtis on line 1 from Port St. Lucie. Thank you, Curtis. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning, Greg.
Morning, sir.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. Every time I listen to the show, Rabbi, you touch on something that I've been participating in and fighting and trying to identify the seller from the buyer. And just like you said, both parties, if anything, would either be innocent or guilty for what they're doing, for what's being called illegal.
Right.
I was in a meeting down in Salerno, and a concerned citizen meeting, and the citizens was just about to the point where they were fed up. So they told the powers that be, which is the policemen, any means necessary. But the any means necessary didn't mean stopping the Mercedes and the Cadillac as it crossed the track. It meant telling those guys at some point, or people, because may have been females also, to leave and don't come back. I don't want to see you back over here. Whether they're in the act or going to do that. And that's the way it's been. They say, well, we can't really take them up to the county because they'll just bail right out. They'll never go to court.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Curtis. Curtis is echoing what I had said earlier, folks, and I'm repeating it, Curtis, because there are people who don't hear your side of the conversation.
Right.
So for those folks, what Curtis is talking about is reiterating how important it is to find either both the seller and the buyer innocent, or find the seller and buyer both guilty. And you mentioned that there was a place where the people told the police any means necessary, and you mentioned also telling them, get out of here, we never want to see you again. And that isn't going to really help the trafficking issue, because then they'll just move to the next town down the road or two towns down the road and set up shop again, and often in a hotel. Hotels are one of the most common places. And the COVID has actually contributed to the problem, because we now have contactless registration where you don't have to go to the front desk to get your room. You make the reservation online, you check in at the kiosk, and you get the key to your room. And nobody ever sees who actually ends up in the hotel room. And it's usually the trafficked victim. And the Johns come and go. $40, $50 for 15 minutes. And, so a trafficked male or female, because they use both, seeing 4 people an hour with not even a chance to wash in between.
Yeah, and if I can make one more comment.
Sure, Curtis.
You talked about helping the stragglers that have a tendency to fall back to the rear. It's our position, or should be, to help those people along, to help them catch up.
Absolutely.
And it brings me to a point where I think about the women, wives that vote their husband's interest instead of voting theirs, because I think some people, especially the financially wealthy, that is supported by their husband's means, will always vote his interest instead of voting maybe female interest or something. So we can get past this, where it means something at the ballot box.
I echo, and Curtis is again repeating it for others. He's talking about women who are pressured or forced to vote according to their husband's political opinions, and that's part of the problem. And you're absolutely right. That is a big part of the problem. The women who are terrified that if things don't stay the way they are, that there is nowhere for them to go. The financial piece on women has been, that's one of the reasons why divorces were not as common as they are today, because there weren't as many choices for women just a few decades ago as there are now. As bad as they are, they're still better. And we need to make them a whole lot better. We need to make it, the sad part, the really sad part about all of this, Curtis and others, is that we are holding back the development of our nation, of our culture, of society, by putting down 50% of the population. We are not taking advantage of the best talent that's available. We are not letting everybody come to the table according to merit. And we might say that that's, not doable. And where the idea of, it's interesting in different cultures, the role that women play. There was Tian was a female empress, a woman empress. Now, I'm not saying she was a nice person. I don't think any of the emperors or empresses were, candidly, because I don't think you can come to that level of power in that way and be a nice person. But she ran China on the basis of merit, and it was her period of her dynasty that she established was known for people having food and safety. So for the commoner, whatever she did in the end worked out. There certainly was palace intrigue and all of that garbage going on, and some of it I'm sure well earned, but again, you don't come from where she started to become Empress of China by being a nice person. It just didn't work that way.
You know, I just want to let you know I totally enjoy your discussions on Friday, and I just might see y'all out there in Port St. Lucie.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful, Curtis. So thank you for listening in, and thank you for calling. You bring up some interesting points, and there's so much work to be done. And so here's a piece out of Torah and out of Talmud. You are not going to finish the task. None of us is. It's bigger than all of us put together, but at the same time, we are not free. That is not an excuse for not working on it. We each must do what we need to do to make a difference. And Allison is saying that merit is begotten by inherited wealth. In one way, yes, because those are the people who are most likely to get educated. But there are cases, and was a chance one of them, where people had to pass a test in order to get an office. So she didn't just do it by wealth. And in fact, one of the criticisms of her is that she didn't allow class and family to be the definition, and that's probably because she herself came from a very low place in the world and rose steadily through the emperor's household.
Okay. Well, that voting thing, I guarantee you, would never fly in our household.
I don't think of Carol as being a little woman either.
She can handle herself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And make up her own mind. There's no
and so Allison is saying in this country, and it's true. We don't know how to test for the right things in our country, unfortunately. There are definitely some things to work on. There's no lack of social ailments, and I'm going to reiterate, folks, and think about this a minute. Why is it legal to buy a service it's illegal to sell?
That's a very interesting question.
Yeah. Once we start holding the customers responsible, and those Mercedes and those Cadillacs that Curtis talked about pulling up at the back door so you don't see them, we should make it absolutely legal to photograph these folks going in and out of the brothels.
Well, police managed to do that to the owner of the New England Patriots.
Once in a blue moon it happens, but it needs to be much more general.
Yeah, but he got off.
Yeah. Well, because the buyer is usually, the women go to jail and the men go home. It's not a fair system. It's not even close to fair. And as I said, so many things that play into it. There is so much work to be done, folks, but that's, to me, a good place to start. Let's clean up, quote unquote, the oldest profession. It's one thing when and I haven't looked to see how much of the sex trade might or might not be going on in places like Las Vegas, where prostitution is just a career path and it's legalized. I want to check into some of that. And Al says the buyer is protected with a capital P. Yes, or as another buddy once put it, men know how to take care of men.
Oh, brother.
I'm sorry.
No.
There's still far too much of the old boys network going on. And that has not changed. And it's not about love, and it's not about it's about power. It's about power. It's about feeling, I've got the upper hand in this. And so here's a piece of terror on the part of the woman in the room. She has no idea what each client is going to ask for. And, who knows, right? And sometimes the victims of being trafficked have to undergo extensive vaginal and anal reconstructive surgery because of the abuse they receive. Yeah. It's not just the momentary discomfort, but they actually do get seriously abused. Yeah. And to allow that to occur in quote unquote a civilized population shows the falsehood and the lies of that label. We allow far too much of that to go on. There's so much more that can be done. And some of that's affordable housing, so that if these women do escape, there's a place for them to know they can go. There just are not enough shelters and that kind of thing throughout the Treasure Coast. That's a serious thing, and our politicians aren't going to like that, but I call on them to start coming up with a real solution instead of just making it illegal to be homeless. That's a far too smooth sounding cop out. And okay. I think my soapbox is well worn for this Friday.
Woo! Boy, you've covered it all.
Yeah.
Well, it's very intriguing that, it sounds like you've got some really, really sharp students.
I do. And the students who come to college in general tend to be fairly astute and fairly willing to tackle it. It was funny. I had an observer in my classroom, and my class, of course, immediately went to questions of Roe v. Wade and things like that, and the psychological impacts of that. They are a well-connected class as far as knowing what's going on in the world. And even with that, they still need their eyes open sometimes, because they might not think about everything.
Well, I'm impressed that they at least know what's going on in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of them do.
Okay.
Most of them do. And it's always sobering to me when a couple of them open up like that one did about being trafficked and told her experiences to that class. So, and hopefully she'll be empathetic. Because it's only when you've experienced the real fear that you can start to be empathetic. So I'm not sure that everybody to wrap it all back up, I'm not sure everybody gets how horrible what happened that January really was for the people in the Capitol. And to not know if they were going to make it out, if they were going to just be a news statistic, if they were going to be the bleeder that led. And so, yeah. We got work to do, folks. We can make this country a whole lot better. We can make this world a whole lot better. Each of us has a role. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. Thank you for listening, and you can join us any Friday evening at 7:30 at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102.
And the plant sale?
Right now on hold for the summer. So.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so we'll see it.
Yep.
See it again in the fall, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Take care, everyone.
Have a good week.
Shabbat Shalom. I like that with the
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster of the world on TuneIn.